Well, black people are Native Americans. We've had, a lot of proof that, some of us started here in this land. Everybody wasn't brought over from Africa.
What are they doing here? They're Indians.
This is one of my many unsuccessful experiments. You see, with Indians, there's absolutely nothing to be done. There's the same difference between a Negro and an Indian as there is between a dog and a coyote. You can put a dog on a leash, beat him, and he'll always be there to lick your feet. Take away a coyote's liberty and you've cut off his air. An Indian will never be a slave. No one has ever been able to make them reproduce in captivity. They do not eat, they do not talk, they do not sleep, they do not make love.
There are several things that are significant about it. Of course, one of them is the way that colonialism tries to develop all kinds of elaborate classification terms for different kinds of people, but that's another subject. The most significant thing here is to reveal the much greater amounts of Native American ancestry that are present within the African American population than most people realize, because they might have been misled by the use of terms like mulatto and also people of color.
After the African, LeVar Burton, had been told that his name was to be Toby, and he refused it, and he was beaten to make him say his name was Toby.
That was the dramatization. How much of that actually was recounted to you? I mean, was there a lot of interweaving?
A lot of it, I thought maybe you were going to ask, and maybe you are in another way, is how much of the book is fact and how much is fiction. Well, a whole lot of it's fiction. Well, a whole lot of it's fiction. Well, a whole lot of it's fiction.
Now, this is just a tiny bit of information now.
But they take it as huge.
Right, because it's cracking open the door.
There's a place in Africa you could say that I'm from. A tribe? I am thrilled. It puts a name, a place, a location, a people.
Hank Greeley is concerned that the science isn't really there yet for you to be giving them the name of a tribe.
I think for most companies, I would be concerned too.
But what about your own company?
We have
he
the largest...
He didn't exclude you. He included you.
But we have the largest set of sequences from Africa. And so with that, we're able to provide some level of probability in terms of frequency.
But he would say that even though you have the largest database, it's still small on the scope of things.
As I said, I share those concerns. We don't oversell. I mean, we just say, look, we provide a service. If you're interested in exploring a tiny bit of your DNA and trace its ancestry, we can do that.
When you say it's a tiny little amount,
it's less than 0.1%. Less than 0.1%. Less than 0.1%.
And that's pretty teeny.
Yeah, but for people who know nothing about any of them, I think it's very important.
You do not know a goddamn thing about Africa. I am from Detroit, Motown. So you can watch Tootsie your monkey ass back to Africa if you want to.
Hello. Hi, how y'all doing? How y'all doing? Happy Educational Friday. I hope everybody's doing well. Shout out to everybody in the building. If you can, hit me a like real quick to get the video in the algorithm, and we'll get started. Shout out to everybody in the building. Today I decided to just kind of go over Booker T. Washington right quick. And the reason I brought him up this week is because, so I don't know if a lot of you guys know this, Booker T. Washington had opposing views to other leaders during his time, like W.E.B. Du Bois and, other people, that they all said they had the common goal, but he went about things a different way. And it's been rumored that, he's done things for Black people on the West, under the table that was covert. And one of those things we're going to discuss today, for sure, that we're going to discuss today. But ultimately, we're going to talk about Booker T. Washington. He has a sketchy past, as they all do. Honestly, I was listening to Dane Live this morning, the one he did last night or the night before, Dane Calloway. And I'm starting to wonder if any of these characters are really true, or even if they're true, how much they embellish these characters. You know what I'm saying? Because like all the rest of them, it's a Black mama with a slave-owning daddy that never claimed Booker T. It's the same story every time you talk about one of these people. But either way, he has a sketchy past, as they all do. But ultimately, he's done some things that I wanted to discuss with y'all. So that's why we're here. And plus, we need to know, because, you know, whatever they told us in school was obviously all wrong. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm trying to think what I learned about Booker T. Washington in school. They talked about him during Black History Month. He was a black leader. Maybe they said a couple things, but for the most part, I didn't learn much of anything. Y'all know how that curriculum was for Black History Month. It's the same curriculum. Shove Martin Luther King down their face. You see what I'm saying? That's typically how I go. But we're going to get into it. Y'all get the likes up on the video. Shout out to everybody in the building. I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Now, as far as Booker T. Washington goes, let's get into a little bit of his bio. Now, these are all articles written on the web, and y'all already know what that means. Take it, figure out what you're going to take, eat the meat, spit out the bone, because they be capping on here. I ain't going to lie. The internet is a place full of lies, even the algorithm and even other sources. So, you know, let's just go with what they say Booker T was and who he was. So he was born 1856, passed 1915. Now, according to this, and according to other things I've read, he was born a slave on April 5th, 1856 in Franklin County, Virginia. After emancipation, he lived for a time in West Virginia before attending Hampton University, or institution at the time, from 1872 to 1875. After graduating, he taught school. In the face of racial hatred, segregation, and disenfranchisement, Washington contended that it was unrealistic for African Americans to gain entry to Americans' white-collar profession. Now, we're getting into what his belief was for the Black community. Now, let me say this. One thing about the people in charge, the powers that be, they are 50 million steps ahead of us. And I believe that they cherry pick these people. A lot of them, especially back in those days, were half and halves. But I believe they cherry pick these people and they give them these identities, and they cosplay these people into the community to make the community believe that they're on their side. I'm not saying that this is about him, but I'm just thinking about the leaders of the past. They choose their leaders, who they want to say is the good person or the person who's great for the Black folk. And I've noticed there's a pattern on these people that are similar to all, and it tells me that these people are made in a lab. Now, I don't know if Booker T. Washington, you know what I'm saying, is an op. He has some oppish things in his bio and in his past. However, for now, we're going to go in with an open head. But right now, we're getting into what he thought the Black community needed, what he felt was best for the Black community at the time, okay? So let's get into it. Take it with a grain of salt if you would like to. If this is genuine or not, let's just go with the move with what the clear people say would happen, okay? So, according to this, and this is Virginia Museum of History and Culture, it says, in the face of racial hatred, segregation, and disenfranchisement, Washington contended that it was unrealistic for African Americans to gain entry into America's white-collar professions. I agree. I think that's one of the big mistakes we made. Then he goes on to say, instead, they should establish themselves as skilled and indispensable laboring class. So, then he believed a political and social inequities would disappear. So this is what Booker T felt. Booker T was like, we don't need to be dealing with them people. What we need to do is building up our own, education-wise, skill-wise, you know what I mean? All of that. We can create our own systems. We can have our own everything. And that way, we won't be treated unfairly because we won't have to be under these folks' command. Now, let's be clear. At this time, around this time, the people in the South are not voting. This is a great thing for Black Americans. We just don't know it yet. Because remember, we're marching, we're protesting and all this for the right to become first-class citizens. But to what? The clear people in their society. So right here, he's right. We don't need to be integrating with them. Let them go over there and do them. We need to be fixing our own stuff. It's almost like we need to be sweeping in front of our own front porch. I agree with that 1,000,000,000%. I think that was a huge mistake that we made. And that's one of the things that he preached. In 1881, Washington put his theory to the test, placed in charge of a fund of $2,000 for establishment of a school in Alabama. He founded the Tuskegee Institute. As this venture grew into a thriving complex of classrooms and workshops, Washington's philosophy gained wide currency. By the early 1900s, the Tuskegee idea represented the mainstream in African American. We know that's not us because we're not African American. But anyway, African American education. And since the death of Frederick Douglass, Washington had become the most visible spoken man of his race. By the time of his death on November 14, 1915, however, other blacks such as W.E.B. Du Bois for show op had come to reject Washington's philosophy as too timid and too gradual. Now, I got to find that video. That's what I was doing. There's a video that, shout out to UBTV. He did a video and he spoke about the stark differences in W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington's approach and how they kept bumping heads. So basically, Booker T. Washington was like, bro, we need to do our own thing. Let the clear stay over there. We go over here. We create our own systems. We create our own, communities, our own everything. And at this point, at that time, once we get that up and running, our own political systems, our own police, everything, then we don't have to worry about being treated unfairly under the strangleholds of these folks because we don't fall under them. Because at the time, like I told you before, we didn't have a right to vote. So that means we technically were not citizens of the United States of the Americas. That was what bit us in the butt. But I'll get into it. So the thing is, though, as it pertains to W.E.B. Du Bois, he believed that we should integrate. We should show the white man that we're just as great as them. We should go to his schools. We should go to his homes, his clubs. We should move into his neighborhoods. We should show him that through our skill, we are just as great of a people, that we shouldn't be treated like this. And then hopefully, this is W.E.B. Du Bois, and I'm paraphrasing, and then hopefully they'll accept us and then we'll be first-class citizens. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But W.E.B. Du Bois, like Booker T. Washington, has that sketchy background. Black slave mama, disappearing act clear, slave owning daddy. All of them got that same sketchy background. So now I'm sitting here squinting my eyes at everybody, but I'm going to listen to what happened, okay? So because of those different ideals, they bumped heads a lot, okay? That's what happened. So, and we're going to get into those stark differences, but I want to go here really quickly. So far we know what he wanted to do, what was going on, and how he wanted everything to carry out for the Black American public, okay? I want to come here to History Matters. Sorry. It says, W.E.B. Du Bois critiques Booker T. Washington. So now this is what W.E.B. Du Bois felt about Booker T. This is how he felt about his ideals and what he's doing or saying that Black Americans should do. It says the most influential public critique of Booker T. Washington's policy of racial accommodation and gradualism came in 1903 when Black leader and intellectual W.E.B. Du Bois published an essay in his collection, The Souls of Black Folk, with the title of Mr. Booker T. Washington and Others. Du Bois rejected Washington's willingness to avoid rocking the racial boat, calling instead for political power, insistence on civil rights, and the higher education of the Negro. Now, okay, so basically, W.E.B. was the op or the arch nemesis to the Booker T. Washington, because he felt like all we got to do, like I said, is show these clear people that we just as good and they'll have to accept us. But Booker T. Washington did not. He thought that it was dumb that we fought for them folks. So W.E.B. Du Bois, being the beige man that he was, he decided, I'm about to go and do a diss track. But in those days, it wasn't an actual track for him. He just wrote a whole doggone memoir on the nigga. You feel what I'm saying? Probably for the most part, for lack of better terms, if I had to translate it from yesterday's time or those times to these times, he probably was saying, Booker T ain't number the old bitch ass nigga, and he a whole hoe out here. That's what I would have got from it, but neither here nor there. So he writes these memoirs because he's trying to discredit Booker T. Washington. Because remember, back in these days, people are looking for people to follow, ideals where they align, and they had typically most of the educated blacks will go toward the W.E.B. Du Bois conversation. And remember what he wanted. W.E.B. Du Bois felt that the talented 10th, which is the top 10% of blacks, should rule over the 90% of blacks. So basically, even if you went the W.E.B. Du Bois route, if you weren't chosen, if you weren't D9, if you weren't, you feel what I'm saying, Boule, if you weren't top tier, connected behind the scenes, that didn't fly for you no way. But they got people in the 90% to buy into that. And this is one of the main reasons why black women in droves went running into these college doors. Because we were taught that that's the best way to do. We got to get in, compete with them, overwork them, outwork them, outpaint them, outpace them, do everything, show them we better than them, and then cross our fingers and hope that they accept us. Well, it's 2025. They still don't accept us. So they had the same end goal. They just had different routes and ways in which they wanted to do it, okay? So I wanted to go, hold on, let me see. I think I pulled this up. Okay, let's go to this article between him and W.E.B. So they had clashing ideologies during the civil rights movement. All right. It says, oh crap, I went down too far. No, never. No, I didn't. No, I can go up. It says, no account of black history in America is complete without an examination of the rivalry between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, which in the late 19th to early 20th centuries changed the course of the quest for equality in American society, and in the process helped give the birth to the modern civil rights movement. Now, let me pause. This is what make me think two different sides of the same coin. Because remember how to think about, put yourself in the mind of the people that are in charge. You have to make this web so deep and so complex that even if you tried to think your way out of it, you wouldn't. So if I was them people in charge, and I need all these folks at the bottom to just continue to be blind and be stupid, then I need a yin and a yang. I need a good cop and I need a bad cop. Does that make sense? So I'm going to create my good cop and I'm going to create my bad cop, and I'm going to put them in front of the people and have them clash with each other, and then make the people divided because they're going to choose a side. And then if they're divided, they can never come together and realize it's just a very, very tiny, tiny, tiny small percentage of us that really running this whole thing, and y'all can really take over it at any given will and get everything you feel like you deserve. Okay? So with that being said, I feel like when you know what you know about history, you start to look at things a bit different. And maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist and I overthink stuff, and I do overthink, but it's given to me, if they got the same background, starkly different doggone ideals or ideologies, but yet they the ones who sparked off the civil rights movement. Which civil rights movement, Vu? Oh, the one that took away our economic powers? The civil rights movement? Yeah, that one that had us trade in our economic freedom to sit next to clear people at the movie theater and on the bus. That civil rights movement. So then I'm thinking about myself as the powers that be. That will work perfectly in my favor. Why not create both characters, put them out there, let them go back and forth with each other, divide the people? It's a win-win. It's a win-win. The world is a stage. Okay, it's a win-win in my opinion. So when I'm reading this, it's giving optees, it's giving fed tees. I don't know. Neither here nor there. So they gave birth to the civil rights movement. Though Washington and Du Bois were born in the same era, both highly accomplished scholars and committed to the cause of the civil rights for black people in America, it was their differences in backgrounds and methods that would have the greatest impact on the future. Washington believed Black people should have economic independence. And this is going to be very important when Washington tells the clear people, we don't want to vote. This is very important because Booker T is going to go to the clear people and say, you know what? You're right, bro. We don't need to vote. Matter of fact, keep your votes, bro. We don't want to vote. We don't want nothing to do with your politics. Y'all, we going to just figure out ourselves. The biggest finesse, or one of the biggest finesses that we've been through in America, is taught that voting is it does anything on a federal level, at least for that matter. But that voting really does what we think it does. When we can all think back in our lives and realize it ain't never did what we wanted it to do when we was casting our ballot. It ain't never did it. I don't care if your person won or if your person lost. Voting has never done what you were taught it was supposed to do. We're in shambles every day of the week. Okay. So basically, he was just basically saying, yo, we don't need your right to vote. We don't want it. Keep it. And this made W.E.B. Du Bois very critical because he's thinking we need to be getting closer to them. Okay. So it says, we already talked about that, born into the slavery. Then after the Civil War, he worked in a salt mine and as a domestic for a white family and eventually attended the Hampton Institute. One of the first all-black schools in America. After completing his education, he began teaching. And in 1881, he was selected to head the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute in Alabama, a sort of vocational school that sought to give African Americans, which are Black Americans, FBAs, indigenous copper color Indians, basically the necessary moral instruction and practical work skills to make them successful in the burgeoning industrial revolution. So now think about it. This is how W.E.B. Du Bois is thinking, or at least this is what they say. So W.E.B. Du Bois is saying, all right, we moving into the industrialism era, right? Industrialism just meaning like the large productions of mass quantity, right? Cars, you know what I'm saying? All the stuff we used to have, like how Motown was, most people at that time, and all the way up, I want to say to maybe like the early 1900s, most people who had really good jobs worked in factories. I don't know if you think about it like that, unless they had like a direct career from college that they specifically focused on, like a doctor or a lawyer. Most of the people who had them good jobs worked for Ford, or they worked for, you know what I mean? They worked at those companies, those major industrialized institutions. So what Booker T is saying, yo, they about to open up all these factories, come up with all these institutions. So boom, this is what we could do. We can compete in those areas. We need to hop on this industrial team. We need to hop on this industrial institution, not even institution, but this industrial thing, and we can create our own thing. Okay? Oh, yeah, yup, Matt Q, back then you was good with a high school diploma. Yes, you was. Yes, you was. All right, it says Washington believed that it was economic independence and the ability to show themselves as productive members of society that would eventually lead Black people to true equality, and that they should, for the time being, set aside any demands for civil rights. These ideas formed the essence of a speech he delivered to a mixed-race audience at the Cotton State and International Exposition in Atlanta in 1895. There and elsewhere, his ideas were readily accepted by both Black people who believed in the practical rationality of his speech or his approach, and white people who were more than happy to defer any real discussions of social and political equality for Black people to a later date. It was, however, referred to pejoratively as the Atlanta Compromise by its critics, and among them was Du Bois. Okay, so now what Booker T is over there saying is, hey, we ain't trying to be around y'all. Y'all ain't trying to be around us. Y'all go over there. Let us go over there. And the clears that were in the meeting was like, bet. Say less. Say less. Okay? That's what the clear people who were saying, say less. We don't want to be around y'all. Y'all don't want to be around us. Cool. But the thing is with that is the clear people, this is how indoctrination works. The clear people don't realize how that would have bit them in the ass tenfold more than us, because economically we were already independent. They needed us. They make money off of us. We don't make money off of no clear people, even in 2025. You see what I'm saying? So they were like, bet we come to this agreement. Now, among the people who disagree with this, most obviously, was your boy, W.E.B, the page, the beige guy. So, born to a free black family, Du Bois first experienced bigotry in college. Now, first of all, he wasn't born to no free black family. One of his parents was either clear, or at least if I don't recall correctly, because I did a whole thing on him. He wasn't born to no all black family. He mixed, W.E.B. Let's really be clear about that. One of his parents is either mixed or fully clear, but one of them is not. He not born to no fully black family. Okay. So basically, Du Bois was born in 1868 in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, to a free black family in a comparatively integrated community. He attended local schools and excelled in his studies, eventually graduating as valedictorian of his class. However, when in 1885, he began attending Fisk University in Tennessee, he encouraged for the first time the open bigotry and repression of the Jim Crow South, and the experience had a profound impact on his thinking. Now, let me say this, and this is the part that got me, and this is no shade. Shout out to my black folks up north. But it's a lot of these so-called quote-unquote leaders that came from up north screaming and hollering and crying and bitching about a situation that they didn't go through up north. W.E.B. Du Bois went to an integrated school where he was valedictorian in Massachusetts. That would have never happened nowhere in the Deep South. Never. It would have never taken place. So W.E.B., it tells me right now, W.E.B. Du Bois has no concept of real racism. Not saying he's never experienced it, but what the people in the South going through, W.E.B. Du Bois don't know nothing about none of that. That nigga was put valedictorian over clear people. During the time when back in those days, you'd be lucky if you can even get in a school where a clear person attended. So this tells me you coming down here to the South to tell blacks what they need to do. He out of line. He out of pocket. He out of pocket. Even though I don't claim Virginia as the South, I still would at least give Booker T that. He was here in amongst the black people and seeing the stuff. Booker T didn't come from none of that. It's like, for instance, it's like a child who grew up in privilege in like King Harris. Not King Harris, but a child who grew up in privilege who runs to the hood and try to tell the people in the hood what they need to do to be in the hood. It's like, you don't know nothing about this. You need to go back to the subs. You feel what I'm saying? So then it goes on to say, that's where he encountered Fisk University, is where he encountered his first act of racism. So he got to college to finally see racism. Fine. Okay. So then Du Bois returned to the North to further his education, with nothing less than equal rights for Black Americans being his ultimate goal. When he earned his PhD from Harvard University in 1895, he was the first Black man to have done so. And in his dissertation, The Suppression of the African Slave Trade to the United States of America, 1638 to 1870, was one of the first academic works on the subject. So W.E.B. Du Bois, he's talking that Africa shit. Remember, the blacks in those days are the people, the copper-colored indigenous people in those days, the so-called black people in those days didn't say they was from Africa. They didn't even, you couldn't even tell them that they were black. It was a derogatory term. And here come W.E.B. Mind you, he got a chokehold on education. So if he writing a book, then guess who's going to read the book? Typically his colleagues and his students, and those inquiring minds coming into adulthood, shaping them. So basically, and remember I told you I agree with Booker, but Booker T, he got some oppie stuff in his past. Now, was he paid to help insert and input this doggone African stuff in here? Because now you talking about the African slave trade from 16 whatever to 18 whatever, when them folks weren't dealing with that. Them folks wasn't teaching that to each other, especially not at home. A child had to go to school or church to learn that theory, okay? So it's giving me IPT, W.E.B, and Booker T, all of them. But I feel like W.E.B. Du Bois is more of an op than Booker T because he was more out loud with his oppish ways, if it makes sense. Like, you don't have to decode the oppish things that W.E.B. Du Bois did, in my opinion. So now he writes this whole dissertation on the African slave. So now we all come from Africa, according to Booker T. Washington. Now they clashed. By the early 20th century, Washington and Du Bois were the two most influential black men in the country. Washington's conciliatory speech to civil rights had made him adapt at fundraising for his Let me read that again. Washington's conciliatory approach to civil rights had made him adept at fundraising for his Tuskegee Institute, as well as for other black organizations, and also endeared him to the white establishment, including the President Theodore Roosevelt, who often consulted him regarding all matters about black people. Now, what's happening is Booker T, W.E.B. Du Bois, they are the go-to for the clears. They like the liaisons between us and those folks, right? So the thing is, when it comes to this Booker T. Washington dude, remember we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about Mount Bayou and that thriving millionaire community that they have. One of the people to come out there and be in awe and so like happy and excited to see black people do so well was Booker T. Washington, because it was 100% independent of the clears. Okay? And something else I noticed too, when I was watching The Underground, go watch this, y'all, on Prime Video. At the end of it, toward the last episode, they find through the Underground Railroad, an actual train that went underground. They stop at this vineyard, and it's an all-black vineyard. And there's so many clear people. These are black people who own this vineyard, and it's black people who live on it and work on it, and they all do extremely well. They eat well, they dress well, they look well, they do well. But in those conversations, they would talk about how one of the guys who run the thing want to get into business with the clears, but the other guy's like, no, that's the worst thing we need to do. We need to keep our independence and use that as leverage. Okay, so back then, when we were economically independent, the biggest mistake was getting in the bed with white people. And that's what W.E.B. Du Bois wanted us to do. That's what he pushed us to do. And even in those movies, they tell us the truth through entertainment. Even in those movies, you saw economically how we were doing. Yes, there were poor black people. There were poor everybody's. But for the most part, as a collective community, we were more economically dependent. I'll say that. We were much more economically dependent. So now the president is consulting these fools about everything that go on with black folk. It says, on the other hand, Du Bois had by that time become the country's foremost black intellectual, having published numerous influential works on the conditions of black Americans. So basically, even though Booker T is really the dude, W.E.B. Du Bois is more popular because he's writing all these books. Ain't no TVs. In contrast to Washington, Du Bois maintained that education and civil rights were the only way to equality, and that conceding their pursuit would simply serve to reinforce the notion of black people as second-class citizens. So there you go. So thank W.E.B. Du Bois. So W.E.B. Du Bois is saying, listen, we have to get into these colleges, we have to get educated, and we have to get into and integrate into society with these people. We have to do this, because if we do not do this, we will remain second-class citizens. But second-class citizens wasn't a bad thing, because just like there's yin to every yang, there's yang to every yin. Being a second-class citizen, the quote-unquote United States government didn't have all of the stuff they have on us. So, for instance, you don't pay your taxes, you're going to jail. Oh, you don't file your whatever. They have full on control. The biggest mistake we made, and this is probably why W.E.B. Du Bois, who both him and Booker, if I can remember if it was Booker, it's either Booker, I know for sure Frederick Douglass, they all studied abroad, Europe. That was the worst thing we did. That's why we're here. So to be honest, when you think about who jacked us off during this civil rights movement crap the most, W.E.B. Du Bois and Martin Luther King. Those two are the spearheads. And to be completely honest, if it wasn't W.E.B. Du Bois and Martin Luther King, it'll be two other folks. So it makes you kind of wonder, you feel what I'm saying? So, okay. So back to where this is. So following a series of articles in which the two men expounded on their ideologies, their differences finally came to a head when in 1903, Du Bois published a work titled The Souls of Black Folks, in which he directly criticized Washington and his approach and went on to demand full civil rights for Black people. Remember, civil rights comes with integration. And integration comes with full control, economic dependency, completely on the clears. More than just deepening the personal dislike between Washington and Du Bois, this ideological rift would in time prove to be one of the most important in the history of the struggle for civil rights. Believing that political action and agitation were the only way to achieve equality, in 1905, Du Bois and other Black intellectuals founded a political group called Niagara, which was dedicated to the cause. Though the group eventually dissolved a few years later, in 1909, several of its members and many of its aims were incorporated into a new organization, the NAACP. For the next 25 years, Du Bois would serve as its director of publicity, as well as the editor of its journal, Crisis, which became the mouthpiece for the organization for Du Bois and the Black American in general. So basically, him coming up with this whole we need to fight for the rights and go to school and all, that birthed the civil rights movement, which also birthed the NAACP. Okay? So, it's the gift that keeps on giving, I guess. When President Woodrow Wilson, I don't care about how he created. When President Woodrow Wilson assumed office in 1913, he immediately segregated the federal government, and Washington consequently lost the political influence he had enjoyed for the previous decade. So, okay, they're saying Woodrow Wilson in 1913 segregated the federal government. So that means prior to, they were integrated. Okay. Then it says he had enjoyed the previous decade. Okay, Washington died in Tuskegee, Alabama on November 14, 1915. Du Bois eventually split from the NAACP, but he continued to champion the cause of civil rights for both African Americans and the African diaspora. There you go, around the world. Girl, the civil rights movement, NAACP, National Association for Colored People. It's never been about us. They just attach our name. We spoke about this when we talked about the political stuff. It's never been about us. They just need our names to get the shit to push it. Then once they get it through, then they give it to everybody except us. That's what they do. That's how they roll. It's crazy work. So he split and he continued to fight for the African diaspora and the African Americans. After joining the American Communist Party in 1961, Du Bois repatriated to Ghana and became a naturalized citizen. So he started that shit too. That's why all the niggas running around there trying to go get citizenship and getting spoofed out their money. Where was I? He died in Ghana, good, on August 27, 1963. I hope they buried him there. At the age of 95, Martin Luther King Jr. led the march on Washington the next day. I don't know if they buried him there, but they should have left him there. Coming in here with that Africa bull crap. And it wasn't just introduced through W.E.B. Du Bois, so don't get it twisted. It was introduced through multiple ways. Multiple ways. But remember, Booker T Frederick Douglass, one thing I will give those two guys is they were hell set against anything from anybody who was saying we either need to be with the clears or we need to leave our land. Between those two, that's their main focus. Anybody who say we need to be amongst the clears or anybody who say we need to leave our land, we need to get them up out of here. That's a pure op. And guess who the other one who, Frederick Douglass couldn't stand? Oh yeah, it was messy for the civil rights leaders back then. Now Frederick Douglass couldn't stand this one because this one kept saying, we need to leave. We need to go somewhere else. We need to go to Africa. And Frederick Douglass came on here and gave a whole speech and said, baby, this land belongs to us. We are home. Why would Frederick Douglass came and said, baby, we would be fools to leave our land. This is our land. Our generations and generations come from here. But who they really had beef with too was Meatball. Yes, they didn't like Meatball. They felt like Meatball. Y'all knew it. I ain't even checked the chat. Yes, they hated Meatball. They was like, first of all, who the hell is this nigga coming over here from Jamaica, short and stout, talking about we come from Africa and we need to go to Africa? Booker T and Frederick Douglass was like, hell no. Hell no. They was like, no, not doing it. We ain't going to Africa because we ain't from there. So it was beef in the streets for the civil rights movements. It was crazy. You had to be there. It was crazy. I'm saying it was insanitary. But anyways, so even though they all had the same end goal, it was just they all wanted to take different routes. But I think they all was leading us in the blind anyway. I will give this to Booker T. That economic independence, if it had worked the way it was supposed to, and it did until it didn't. Let's really be clear, because it did up until Mike. Up until Mike, it was working for the most part. You feel what I'm saying? If it had continued and Mike never happened and this whole civil rights movement thing never happened, we would be our own independent nation at home in our own lands. Taxes? No. Falling under the judicial system? No, the clears wouldn't be trying Diddy. We would be trying Diddy. We would be educating our children. We would be training each other in skills. We would have our own everything, our own presidents, whatever representation, whatever we need a chief, our own everything. And we can sit at the table and bargain and we can say, yeah, we'll agree to that. Nah, we're not agreeing to that. Yeah, we'll do that, but nah, we're not taking that. Okay, so you want us to do this. What do we get? That's how we do it. But when we decided to integrate into their system, a system that has never been set to work in our favor, that was the biggest mistake we ever made. And we've been kicking and screaming and crying about it ever since. What's the first thing we say? The court system don't like black men. Black people don't get a fair shakedown at the job. What ain't that what we be saying? We didn't get X, Y, and Z because we black. Because you are trying to change their system, even though they stole it from us. Instead of going, well, I guess what Booker T was saying was, listen, they done stole our system. They got that shit. Let them have it. Let them have it. Let's recreate our own new political let's start from scratch. Let them stay over there. We come over here. We will be responsible for each other. We would have our own military, our own everything. And all them wars that be happening, we would have to go to war. And I'm confident that we would win. Because we were winning all the wars we were fighting for the most part back then. So, but again, they all got these sketchy passes, so it's kind of hard to kind of gauge. But we're going to eat the meat and spit out the bones today, because today we not really, we just going to see what we can get from it, what we can come out of it, okay? Now, I wanted to show you guys, hold on, let me go on YouTube. Because UBTV, shout out to UBTV, Uriah Brandon. He sent me another video. I watched like maybe the first 30 minutes of it. I got to finish watching it. I love his content. I absolutely adore his content. Like, insanely. Like, it's crazy. But wait, before I do that, I can look for this while I play this for y'all really quickly. Hold on. Hold on really quickly, y'all. Lord, what his line is. First of all, I hate this man's face. This is the man who got us all taken. This is the man who got us. This the man who got us all taking these DNA tests, telling us we from Africa. So take it. Hey, eat the meat, spit out the bones. We already said what we gonna do. We already said what we was gonna do.
A young man set out on foot on a 500-mile journey across the state of Virginia.
Success is to be measured, not so much by the position that one has reached in life, as by the obstacles which he has overcome. This quote by the great Booker T. Washington perfectly sums up his own life.
Wait, pause. Hold on, because I don't want them to copyright me. Hold on. I think I had another video really quickly. I just don't, because I know how they are with those. You see what I'm saying? I just want to make sure. One second. Because I know them. Yeah, this is the one I want to show y'all. Because I know the major like PBS channels, they don't play.
Black community in the late 19th and early 20th century were Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. However, they disagreed sharply on strategies for racial and economic progress. At the time, W.E.B. Du Bois and Washington dispute polarized African American leaders into two wings of the Black community: the more conservative supporters of Washington and his more radical critics. W.E.B. Du Bois' philosophy of agitation and protest for civil rights flowed directly into the civil rights movement, which began in the 1950s and exploded in the 1960s. Booker T. Washington was associated, perhaps unfairly, with self-help, colorblind, Republican wing of the Black community and its leaders. Welcome to One Mic. I'm your host, Country Boy, and if you hadn't guessed, this episode is about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois and their conflicts over the direction of the Black movement in the early 20th century. This episode will primarily focus on Booker T. Washington and his conflict and criticisms from W.E.B. Du Bois. Without further ado, if you like this, if you enjoy this, please consider donating to our Patreon page so I can continue bringing you dope content. Also, give us 5 stars, rate us on Apple Podcasts, and lastly, listen to The Cut for all your Black pop culture needs.
Can you please just hear me out? No, all work management platforms.
Anyway,
in 1856 on a farm in Virginia Blue Ridge Mountains.
That looked like
His
an
mother
AI
was an
picture.
enslaved African American.
That shit don't even look real. Is it me? I might be tripping. That picture don't look real. That look like an AI photo. That don't even look like it's a real photo. I can look at the contrast of his hand to his coat. That's not even a real photo. That's not even a real photo. Let me make this bigger so y'all can see. I can see the contrast, and it don't even, like, I can glance, but I'm looking at the contrast from that white glove hand, and that's a Masonic symbol, but neither here nor there. But that white glove hand, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I might be tripping. I might be tripping. My bad.
American woman by the name of Jane with no middle name or last name, which was the practice at the time. His father was unknown, but Washington's light brown skin, reddish hair, and gray eyes heavily suggested white paternity. Washington would later comment on his father, saying, "I was never able to learn with any degree of certainty who he was." But a century later, his daughter would insist her grandfather was a man by the name of Ben Hatcher, a local blacksmith who took his mother in after a runaway attempt, and she was pregnant with Booker when she was recovered by her slave owners. Either way, Ben Hatcher played no part in Booker T. Washington's life. The plantation that he lived on was owned by a man by the name of James Burroughs. Burroughs owned 10 slaves, 6 of them being children. Washington was one of those 6 children, and at the time was simply known by the name Booker. Washington would recall his slavery days, stating, "My life in its beginnings in the midst of the most miserable and desolate, discouraging surroundings." He would later also speak on his schooling as a slave, stating that, "I had no schooling whatsoever while I was a slave, although I remember on several occasions I would go as far as the schoolhouse door with one of my mistresses to carry her books. The picture of the picture of several dozen boys and girls in a schoolroom engaged in study made a deep impression on me, and I had a feeling that getting into the schoolhouse and study in this way would be about as the same as getting into paradise." He expressed resentment to his mother about not being able to go to school, and she simply explained to him that this was the reality of the slave's condition. And from that moment, it was clear to me that I could not go to school and that it was dangerous for me to learn to read. And from that moment, I resolved that I could not be satisfied until I learned what this dangerous practice was like. After the emancipation,
these books be capped. Frederick Douglass' book, a bunch of cap in that too. I don't even know if these people really writing these biographies to be completely honest. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? But it's always a struggle story in there, of course, like they all do. But yeah, whatever, girl, whatever.
Proclamation in 1862, his family moved to Hales Ford, West Virginia, to be with his mother's new husband, a man by the name of Washington Ferguson. From there, his family walked almost 200 miles from Hales Ford, West Virginia to Maiden, West Virginia. The trip took several weeks and they slept outside for most of the trip. Washington would recall this trip and remembered it as a fun adventure. After arriving in Maiden, Washington was still unable to go to school, and at the age of 9, he began working in the salt furnace and later in the coal mines with his mother's husband, Washington Ferguson. Determined to get an education, he was able to persuade his mother and Ferguson to let him go to school if he worked in the salt works from 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. Once at school, he realized that he needed a surname, so he spontaneously came up with the last name of Washington, and later discovered that his mother considered Tafero to be his surname, and he took that up as his middle name, and the name Booker T. Washington was born. While he was much older and working in the
what was his middle name? I'm gonna look that up.
coal mines, he overheard two black miners discuss a newly established school for blacks in Hampton, Virginia, a place where poor students could work and earn a tuition and board. In 1872, Washington left Maiden with very few cash because Ferguson appropriated most of his wages. He traveled almost 500 miles with very little money before arriving in Hampton Creek. He enrolled in Hampton's Normal and Agricultural Institute, now Hampton University, in Virginia in 1872. Working as a janitor to pay his school expenses, he graduated in 1875 and returned to Maiden, where he would conduct a colored school where he taught 90 children during the day and about 90 adults at night. He also tutored students at night,
I have a really question. I'm just trying to be realistic. All I'm trying to do is just trying to be realistic. And I really, truly have a genuine question. If he came from slavery and then he was able to be a janitor and work as a janitor from emancipation and then graduate high school or college, I can't remember which school he just said, but how the hell could he afford to teach students anything? I mean, maybe it was free. Maybe he would sit at the park and teach the kids, but I doubt that because in those times, according to history, black kids couldn't read in the South. So who and where and how was he teaching children to read? Financially, you still got to pay for it. It's still going to cost you something. It's not going to fully be free. But I'm just wondering, off a janitor salary, ex-slave, black, nobody's paying you any money. You don't have nothing. This is according to history. I'm just curious as to how he was capable of being so successful. You know what I mean? That's just all.
2 Sunday schools and did supplemental learning lessons for combing hair and brushing teeth and bathing. Following his studies at Wayland Seminary in Washington, D.C. in 1879, he was asked by General Samuel Chapman Armstrong, who was the man that established Hampton University, to deliver the commencement speech at Hampton. After the commencement speech, Washington was asked to join the staff at Hampton as a teacher. In 1881, Washington, after a few years of teaching at Hampton Institute, General Armstrong told Booker about a request from Tuskegee, Alabama, for a white man to organize and run a normal school. Armstrong replied that he knew of no good white candidates, but he knew of a very competent, capable mulatto who was clear-headed, modest, sensible, polite, thorough teacher, and a superior man. The Normal Institute opened in July 4th of 1881 with only one building to hold classes. This was Zion Negro Church. It had cracks that poured in sunlight, cold, air, rain. During wet weather, a student would have to hold umbrella over Booker as he taught. Most of the students didn't have money for school, so Washington put them to work as he did when he was at Hampton. Washington understood that he and his...
Who were the students who had money for school, and where did they get that from if their parents were slaves? Where did the slaves earn money? We learned in the movie Sinners that even the plantations would have their own currency. But if they weren't getting paid anything and they were slaves, how did they get money?
His students would have to build Tuskegee Institute themselves. He felt that building the school themselves would make it an exclusive African-American achievement. It proved that blacks could accomplish a large, complex task and demonstrate to whites that blacks were capable of running a large enterprise without the help or interference of whites. Almost every other black institution of higher learning was built and run by whites.
What if the next step in your career is closer than you think? With course,
so they're crediting Booker T with the first real black school, because all the other ones, as we all know, owned by the Clears.
South Carolina's Governor Ben Tillman said that when you educate a Negro, you educate a candidate for the penitentiary, or you spoil a good field hand. The opposition reflected white anxiety about political control. They felt that blacks would take advantage of schoolhouses, get educated, and vote them out. One of the most powerful arguments.
Why do you think that is? So they're saying they're afraid of black education because they were saying, first of all, if you educate them, you'll take them away from the field hand or from the school or something like that. But what he was saying was he's afraid, the Clear people were afraid that if black people got educated and they started voting and got in, they will vote us out. Because you know why that was going on? Because they had just got it from us. They were just in the process of taking everything from us. Remember, Woodrow Wilson didn't segregate the federal government until he got there. So we were in positions of power. We spoke about this on this channel. We spoke about how all them black men prior to this time was in positions of government in Louisiana, all through Mississippi, through the South, everything. The reason why they were afraid for black people to get any type of leverage is because they thought that we would take it back. Not because we would just be upset of how they treated us. That's one thing. They were thinking, or they think to this day that something inherently in us tells us that they stole this from us and we just might do something heinous to take it back. That's why they keep their foots on our necks, to make sure that we're not ever in a position to do what, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? Take it back. Now they teach us that we never had it, which was the biggest cap of all time. They will teach us that we never had it. That's why stories like this go, oh, Booker T was a poor slave, came from nothing. His mother was a slave. His dad was a slave owner, but he never knew him because he was white. And they never had anything. And then you'll notice the story will go from that to, oh, and then he was able to build this and he was able to start that. And I'm like, well, hold on, pause, skirt. You just told me he was poor living on a plantation with his mammy. Where he getting money to do all of this from? And where were the Clears to be on his neck like, boy, have you lost your mind? But that goes to show you the fabrication in the story. There's always huge chunks missing. But most people miss that because they just kind of go with the move. You see what I'm saying? So that's why all them stories sound like that. Every single one of them stories you hear about these people sound the same. Ask yourself why. That's all I'm asking. Because if you go pull up all their bios from back then, they all 50 to 60% damn near copy and paste.
white Southerners against black education was that black children getting educated would take limited resources for education from whites. It was a zero-sum game, that any gain for blacks was a loss for the status of whites. White Southerners connected
because it was. The whites were poor Slavic people at the time. They were working in the fields with the blacks, not as often, but they did. For the most part, they were poor, they were busted and disgusted. They knew that if black people got back on their feet, then they gonna go right back to the slums they came from. That's why they were so hell-bent in forming all these groups, the KKK, because there was no way they could ever let us get back into that position.
Opposition to black education, to
when people say we were kings and queens, when people say we were kings and queens in Africa, I say no, we were kings and queens right here. Let's really be clear about that.
It's connected their opposition to black education to blacks' interest in politics. By the end of the first year at Tuskegee, Washington faced a diverse and unscrupulous means of white oppression. So Booker would model Tuskegee as a model community of race relations, a place where whites and blacks could pretend they had no past conflicts. Washington knew this model was compatible with Southern whites' ideas of the Old South. The idea of the model community is that blacks had no reason to complain about the racial condition, and it prevented blacks from engaging in the dangerous act of criticism how they were treated. This idea created a perfect island of racial harmony in a world filled with racial conflict. This bought Washington the space and time he needed to do the work in building Tuskegee University. By 1888, Tuskegee Institute had more than 400 students and 25 members of faculty. When the school began a thriving trade in carriage and wagon building, their white neighbors would regard the black man who would supply skills as a valuable asset to the community. Washington saw this racial independence as a fundamental principle of his strategy for African Americans. The individual that can do something in the world that the world wants done will in the end make his way regardless of race. While whites got suspicious of local blacks controlling so much of the local property, Washington believed he had demonstrated what blacks could do on their own. The vision of that schoolroom and the idea of learning.
You hear that? Whites getting nervous. They say the blacks was controlling too much of the property. You hear that? And this is back. Let me move on.
Was paradise will provide a lifelong inspiration for Washington, and Tuskegee Institute was the embodiment of Washington's overarching belief that African Americans should forego political agitation in favor of a industrial education and agricultural expertise. When it was established that the Institute had only 2 small buildings and no equipment and very little money, but Tuskegee's Normal and Industrial Institute will become a monument to Washington's life work.
I wonder if I should raise my prices.
So Booker T was willing to trade in whatever political power or whatever voting rights y'all trying to give us. He said, we'll deny that and we'll continue to work on our economic independence. That's all he was saying. I don't want to skate with you niggas. I don't want to vote with you niggas. I don't want to do nothing with y'all. Y'all go over there. We gonna stay over here. That's what he was saying.
He became a public man who took a position in important race matters. Washington would begin to strongly condemn the sharecropper system, saying that the crop lien system robbed black farmers of nearly half of their earnings, and it was impossible under the sharecropping system to escape debt and gain independence. He was also spoke out about convict leasing, in which a prisoner was leased to a private contractor to work on railroads, mines, and farms. The system resulted in appalling inhumanity because prisoners were almost disposable to the private contractors. One Georgia prisoner's feet rotted off when he was forced to work in the winter without shoes. Anything Washington would say publicly was undercut by white Southerners' belief that blacks would not be able to survive in freedom, and they would ultimately die out without the care or concern from their white masters. In the 1880s, this began to change when blacks began to gain status and attempted to educate themselves.
So this is my question. So you mean to tell me that the clears were split? Some of them believe that we would die out because we were not taking care of our slave masters and we would be like destitute, we be jacked up. And then the other ones believe, God, no, we can never let them have any sort of power, because if they do, they'll retaliate. So we was too stupid and too and also feared at the same time. So this is how they thought about us. Part of them thought, well, they won't survive no way, which we proved them wrong. And then the other part of them thought, or at least another part of them thought, oh yeah, well, we just got to keep them down, keep our foots on their necks, because we cannot allow them any type of way to get a leg up, because if they do, we're screwed. So either you believe that we were bums or not.
Whites felt that blacks would begin to compete with whites for jobs and would inevitably lead to a racial competition. In 1895, Booker T. Washington would deliver his famous Atlanta Compromise speech at the Cotton States and International Exposition in Atlanta. Considered the definitive statement of what Washington termed his accommodationist strategy of black response to Southern racial tensions in an attempt to diffuse white anxiety about black competition. It was widely regarded as one of the most significant speeches in American history at the time. Washington's speech responded to the Negro problem, which was a question about the relationship between blacks and whites in an economically shifting South. Washington was attempting to challenge the demonization of blacks, and his opportunity would take place in 1894 at a committee meeting with the House of Representatives, at which funding had been requested for the Cotton States and International Exposition. In 1893, at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, blacks had been excluded, and there had been loud criticisms about that slight. So to resolve any criticism beforehand at the Atlanta Exposition, they asked for black advocates to speak to the House committee. The exposition planners asked Washington to speak about the American Negro to the House of Representatives. In recognition to his effectiveness before Congress, the exposition planners asked him to oversee the preparation of a Negro Building Act exhibit. Washington would decline, but arrange for an appointment of an acquaintance to represent blacks' interests at the exposition. Some blacks objected to the segregation black event space, but Washington accepted it as an opportunity to show black achievements rather than having blacks disappear in a sea of white exhibits. The event planners decided that it would be a good public relations gesture to also have a black speaker at the opening ceremony. Washington's emphasis on economic goals among blacks and his appeasing posture towards white Southerners made him the perfect complement to the new Southern movement ideals at the event. So they asked him to be the speaker at the opening ceremony. In September 18th of 1895, when he delivered his speech, he began by thanking the organizers for recognizing the value of the American Negro. This was at a time when Southerners saw blacks as worthless and bestial. He conceded to white Southerners what they already thought, that it was a mistake to enfranchise the American Negro and that the days of black political activism were over. Reconstruction had been a misguided experiment that led blacks to believe they could begin their freedom at the top and that a seat in Congress was more valuable than owning land or having a skill. Washington was willing to concede independent black political power in an attempt to reduce white hostility. Washington insisted that blacks had learned from the past and that the masses of us are willing to live by the production of our own hands. Washington described blacks as faithful, law-abiding, and unresentful, all traits that contradicted the opinion of Southern whites. This was an attempt to counter the belief that free blacks had declined in character and morality in the 30 years since slavery. Washington promised his audience that he would encourage blacks to be more proficient in agriculture, mechanics, commerce, and domestic service, and that he would encourage them to dignify and glory common labor. Washington also eased whites' fears about blacks' desire for social integration by stating that both races could be separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. Washington's speech also called for whites to take responsibility for improving social and economic relations between the races, praising the South for some of the opportunities it had given blacks since the Emancipation Proclamation. Washington asks to trust blacks and provide them with opportunities so that both races could advance in industry and agriculture. This shared responsibility became known as the Atlanta Compromise. The speech was greeted with a thunderous applause and a standing ovation.
That sounds good to me. I don't know. I don't. The Atlanta Compromise speech that he did, he basically spoke about the independence of Black Americans and how we need to be economically independent. Assured them clear people, you ain't got to worry. We ain't trying to come move in your neighborhoods. We ain't trying to sleep next to y'all. We ain't trying to eat next to y'all. You know what I mean? So personally, if I were alive back then and I was following one of the four, I would probably lean more toward the Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington. I wouldn't lean toward the W.E.B. Du Bois way because they believe in that talented 10 thing. That right there within itself loses me. But if we had followed that doggone guideline and that the stuff that man has set up, hell, matter of fact, we probably could still do it today. I think we would be. Listen, we are the economy. We already are that. Imagine if we controlled it. Imagine if our artists didn't sign to those people and we ran the record companies. Don't get me wrong, niggas gonna scam niggas. Don't get me wrong. But you know what I mean? It wouldn't be to, I don't know if I ain't gonna say it wouldn't be to this level because niggas done scam niggas. Look at Diddy. You see what I'm saying? But I'm saying that to say, imagine if we had stuck to those ideals, like where we would be in society today. We messed up trying to go along to get along and fit in. We jacked up.
Clark Howell, editor of the Atlanta Constitution, proclaimed that the speech was the beginning of a moral revolution in America. Washington's words were greeted enthusiastically by whites in both the North and the South, and by most of the African American leaders. The Southern fame that Washington gained in Atlanta thrusted on him by blacks looking for a new leader because Frederick Douglass had passed away in 1895. Washington was also in step with the general shift in orientation of blacks away from politics towards economic and educational progress. His ascension to national black leadership was a result of the timing of the Atlanta speech, the death of Frederick Douglass, and the lack of other viable candidates. He accepted his leadership role without hesitation, but ironically, before the Atlanta speech, he rarely sought the limelight and never attempted to gain popularity or fame with blacks. Capitalizing on his fame from the Atlanta Exposition and the publishing of his autobiography Up From Slavery, Theodore Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington to dine with him and his family as his race advisor shortly after moving into the White House. Roosevelt saw Washington as a brilliant advisor on race matters, and this advisory position with the White House would continue with his successor, William Taft. Washington's visit would provoke an outpouring of angry, vicious, blatantly racist responses from Southern politicians and press. Senator James K. Vardaman of Mississippi would complain to the press that White House is so saturated with the odor of nigger that the rats have taken refuge in the stable. The Memphis Scimitar wrote, "This is the most damnedest outrage which was ever perpetrated by any citizen of the United States." The Missouri Sentinel published on its front page a poem entitled "Niggers in the White House," in which it ended suggesting that the president's daughter should marry Washington or his son one of Washington's relatives. And probably the most offensive response came from Senator Benjamin Tillman of South Carolina.
I missed that part. I was reading the text. What'd they say?
The Missouri Sentinel published on its front page a poem entitled "Niggers in the White House," in which it ended suggesting that the president's daughter should marry Washington or his son one of Washington's relatives. And probably the most offensive response came from Senator Benjamin Tillman of South Carolina. It had said that we should have to kill 1,000 niggers to get them back in their place. The Southern press was a bit more gracious. They acknowledged Washington's accomplishments and suggested that dinner was an attempt by Theodore Roosevelt to show that he was everybody's president. Bishop Henry Turner said that you are a great representative and a hero to the Negro race. But even African American leaders were critical of Washington. William Monroe Trotter called Washington a hypocrite who supports social segregation between whites and blacks while he himself dines in the White House. This reaction affected the White House practice, and no other.
He got a point. He got a point. Now, I ain't gonna lie, Booker T, can we talk? Now, you was over there to the black people, to the black folks, teaching economic independence, no integrating and all of that. And then as soon as you got your invite down to the White House, you couldn't wait to put on your shirt and tie. So I'm with whoever was critical of that. I'm with him, and that takes away credibility from your message because you can't say something and do something else. That's why a lot of black leaders, they have to go marry black women because we're not going to listen to them if they come with a clear one. We just don't. Same thing with Washington, with Booker T. That's a fair critique. How are you going to preach to us that we shouldn't integrate with these people, but at the very moment the president call you, you go running over there? And let's be really clear about this. They are very strategic with the way that they do things. If you ask me, they probably invited him there on purpose, hoping that he bites so that he can show the people that because remember, right now for the powers that be, not the regular whites, the people, the real people, the top people, what they need is to us to get on board with this civil rights movement. They don't need us to be economically independent. They're in the works of trying to take things away, not make sure that we gain, okay? So think about it. It would, if I were the powers that be, I would send the president to invite him to show the people who look at, is this your leader? Is this your king? That's basically what they did. Is this your king? Oh, yeah, y'all need to segregate, but I'm going to go up here by the White House. You can't do that. You just can't. You absolutely, under no circumstance, you can't do it.
Other African Americans was invited to dine in the White House for almost 30 years. Theodore Roosevelt did meet with Washington, but never for a meal. They met in his office during business hours. Theodore Roosevelt continued to speak out against lynchings, but took no significant steps to the cause of African American rights. The controversy hurt Roosevelt's representation and diminished his support within the African American community and shaped his relationship with Washington going forward. It was around this time in 1894 that Washington met.
Yeah, we know he was advocating for the blacks. I think what we were saying was, or was somebody back then who was alive back then, I forget his name, he had a critique for Washington. He just felt like, Booker, bro, how you gonna preach to us that we need to be separate and have our own this and our own that, but every time we turn around, you running up there to the White House. That's basically what he was saying. And that younger photo, real or fake, that's a Masonic pose. That hand in the coat thing, the hand, the one arm and the one hand with the white glove, that's all Masonic. And all your presidents are Masons. So it would make sense. Think about it. It would make sense that behind the scenes, they clinging to a few glasses and slapping five and having a good time. Yeah, the optics were very bad. The optics couldn't be any worse, to be completely honest. But that was a fair critique. I would feel the same way too.
A man by the name of William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. These two were very different men. Du Bois was a writer and scholar based on the East Coast and admired European culture, whereas Booker T. Washington, on the other hand, was an educator and a businessman and was attempting to build a black school in the Deep South. Washington didn't like urban life, and Du Bois felt like cities fostered thought and culture. Their locations and social standing shaped their opposing views on education and racial uplift. Washington saw the benefit of a gradual process, whereas Du Bois wanted a more direct and immediate action. Washington pushed for vocational training, whereas Du Bois favored collegiate education. Du Bois would state, education must not simply teach work, it must teach life. Washington's approach was practical to the masses of children of former slaves, whereas Du Bois focused on advancing the talented 10th, which was an exceptional group of college-educated African Americans who would uplift the Black community. In 1899, Washington invited Du Bois to lead research on all aspects of Black life. He'd envisioned his research with his campaign to improve the Black image in the white mind. Du Bois had reservations that the only opinion that mattered at Tuskegee was Booker T. Washington's, and that Tuskegee was so invested in industrial education that the Black experience would take a back seat.
So they ended up working together. What? Did I miss that? I think I'd be thinking too much, because even when I'm listening, I'd be missing stuff. What happened?
Washington's, and that Tuskegee was so invested in industrial work, it must teach life. Washington's approach was practical to the masses of children of former slaves, whereas Du Bois focused on advancing the talented 10th, which was an exceptional group of college-educated African Americans who would...
So what they're saying is Booker T was worried about and focused on the regular, everyday, average Black person, and W.E.B. Du Bois was worried about the top 10%, which is AKA the talented 10th. That was his main focus. I don't need all Black people to liberate and do well. To hell with all Black people. I just need 10%. That's W.E.B. Du Bois' take. That's his goal. That's his thing. I don't need success for Blacks. I don't need nothing for all Blacks. I just need 10% of Blacks to run the rest of the 90%, and we good.
Uplift the Black community. In 1899, Washington invited Du Bois to lead research on all aspects of Black life. He'd envisioned his research with his campaign to improve the Black image in the white mind. Du Bois had reservations.
Now pause. Hold on, Booker. Because now you know what this is giving me? Y'all remember that episode of Martin when Gina, Cole, Pam, and Tommy went to the church to prove to Mama Payne that the pastor was fake? Remember that episode with David Allen Greer when he came in? The Holy Ghost told me everything gonna be all right. Yeah, Holy Ghost told me. That's what it's giving. All this shit sounds staged to me. So y'all was arch nemesis all this time. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a whole thing on you, calling you a hoe ass nigga. I ain't saying that people can't make up, but y'all have completely different ideals. Don't this remind you of Martin and Malcolm? But neither here nor there. And then all of a sudden, y'all got cool and you invite W.E.B. Du Bois to write on Black people. That's the last nigga you need to be writing on what niggas need. Remember, y'all disagree completely. Two niggas couldn't be more opposite than you niggas. Why would you invite him to come to your school and talk about Black life and Black people? Have you lost your rabbit? Y'all don't even share the same freaking ideals. But if they work for the same person or the same people or the same...
is that the only opinion that mattered at Tuskegee was Booker T. Washington's, and that Tuskegee was so invested in industrial education that the Black experience would take a back seat. So he declined the offer, explaining to Washington that he could do more good at Atlanta University. During the same time, W.E.B. Du Bois had a third option in Washington, D.C. as an assistant superintendent for a colored school. Du Bois asked Washington for an endorsement for the position, and Washington sent the letter of endorsement, but immediately heard objections from allies in the Capitol because of their support for another candidate named Robert Terrell. When Robert Terrell was appointed to the position, Du Bois was deeply disappointed and suspected that Washington had betrayed him because he didn't take the Tuskegee position. At the same time, Du Bois was seeking the assistant superintendent position in D.C. He was declined a sleeping berth in a Pullman car in Atlanta. He once again asked for Washington's assistance, but Du Bois' disappointment about not getting the assistant superintendent position and his anger about the mistreatment by the railroad appears to have pushed him to alienate himself from Booker T. Washington. He didn't speak a word of this publicly, but it appears that the rift between Washington and Du Bois seemed to have been personal before it was ideological. April of 1903, Du Bois released The Souls of Black Folks. It was a collection of 15 pieces, mostly essays written about Black rural life and observations about the African American experience. Du Bois's book was enormously important, not simply because it was some of the finest writing by a Black person during the period, but also because it laid bare the widening rift between young Black intellectuals like Du Bois and the established Negro leadership under Washington.
This is Pod 5, the first.
Sorry about that, y'all. Y'all get the likes up on the video, please, and thank you. Like the video, please.
Sharp criticism for Booker T. Washington that Washington was a Black leader chosen by whites, having won their favor in 1895 with this Atlanta Compromise. He argued that Washington allegedly surrendered civil and political rights for economic opportunities. Washington had in his humble approach made few demands on behalf of Blacks and their white response. Du Bois suggested that Washington's program practically accepted the alleged inferiority of the Negro race. Washington had stressed industrial and agricultural training for Negroes, thus he tended to be anti-intellectual and saw problems from a rural, small town born into slavery's perspective. Washington asked Blacks to forego political power, civil rights, and education. His request was for appeasement and patience on the part of Negroes. Therefore, in the eyes of Du Bois, he ignored the reality of white force and violence against Negro citizenship. Du Bois insisted that Washington's message left the impressions that Negroes' low status justified white prejudice, and that this encouraged whites to shift responsibility for the Negro problem entirely on the Black shoulders. Booker T. Washington failed to make criticisms of whites that they needed to hear but didn't want to hear. He depended on the good of whites in the South and upon white philanthropy from the North. Therefore, his ability as a spokesperson for Negro aspirations could be doubted. He built around him an efficient machine which channeled white goodwill and Republican support to selected Negroes. Thus, they could stifle any criticisms and threat to his power. For these reasons.
So wait, it sounds like they're saying Booker T started drinking the Kool-Aid, because not only is he frolicking with the clears, now he working, rubbing shoulders with them. You know what I mean? It sounds like he started playing the game. And this was the hand that W.E.B. Du Bois fanned with, because now he can go back to your followers and be like, see, look at your leader, look at your king. While he over here telling y'all to be economically independent, and if I'm W.E.B. Du Bois and want y'all to go my way, then I'm going to say, or not go the way that he's going, I'm going to say, look at y'all. Now, y'all over here trying to be economically independent, and he over there rubbing shoulders with them. So now they back beefing again. This is insanitary. This is a soap opera.
And the Souls of Black Folks, this signaled a break between Washington and Du Bois and galvanized Du Bois as a leader and a spokesman of the anti-Booker T. Washington leadership forces. Publicly, Washington maintained his silence about Du Bois's attack, but Washington deployed resentment toward Du Bois' insinuation of his cowardice. Washington would privately point out the extreme hypocrisy given that Du Bois chose not to vote, but would condemn Washington for surrendering Black political rights. Du Bois brought the anti-Washington movement together in a conference in July 1905 in Buffalo, New York, called the Niagara Movement. It issued a direct challenge to the philosophy and leadership of Booker T. Washington. Having been a subject of tyranny to Washington's political machine, the social conference attendees asked for free speech and ability to criticize in response to what they saw Washington sell out Negroes' political and social rights. They insisted on the principle of manhood suffrage and demanded the abolishment of the caste system based off race or color. While they were willing to concede Washington's concern for the training of the Negro common man, the attendees rejected his anti-intellectual position against higher education for the Negro's man's ability to learn. This glaring failure of Washington's model for Black advancement had galvanized Blacks into action against Washington. He encouraged the training of obsolete crafts and based blacks' economic future on a sick and dying Southern agriculture, and ignored the future urban role of blacks and relied completely on the philanthropy of whites in the North and the South. But none of this was equal to his public blindness to the growing horror of racial violence against blacks. It was this response that blacks and whites organized independent of Booker T. Washington.
You want to take your communication to the next level, whether you're running a business.
That's crazy. Hold on.
Happened in 1906, it once again galvanized Washington critics against him. The Atlanta riot.
So W.E.B. Du Bois was able to get Booker T's people to turn on him. That's crazy.
1906 was a major outbreak of violence in Atlanta, Georgia, that killed at least 12, possibly as many as 25 African Americans, burned more than 1,000 homes and businesses in African American neighborhoods. White mobs inflamed by newspaper reports of black men attacking and raping white women, with an additional underlying cause of growing racial tensions.
I sure wish we can get rid of the narrative of black men running around raping these hoes, these white women who running behind that BBC. Oh, girls, even back then they knew their wives was hoes, and their little peckerwoods was real small. Yo, you know good and well your wife ain't get raped. You married her. You know she a hoe. You know she been looking at that boy over there for the last 3-4 months. They just be needing reasons to take it out on a nigga. That's all.
Rapidly changing city and economy with competitions for jobs, housing, and political power. Du Bois would write a poem, A Litany in Atlanta, in which again he spoke on Washington. Behold this maimed and broken thing. Dear God, it was a humble black man who toiled and sweat to save a bit of pittance paid to him, and once again, catastrophe for Americans undermined his leadership. Washington worried that indiscriminate condemnation of whites would incite further white backlash. Blacks should talk about their white friends rather than the whites that wished him evil. But in the weeks after the riots, this fell on deaf ears. Bishop Alexander, formerly an ally of Washington, was now a critic. The object of our enemies is to make us serfs. It is nonsense to cry peace when there is no peace. We are determined to rise or die in this new attempt to attain our rights. In the face of these criticisms, Booker T. Washington would work to shape the meaning of what a riot was. The New York World attributed the riot to white labor hostility towards black competition, but Washington would privately dismiss this explanation, stating that neither of the races in the South had reached a point where they would be willing to fight for the opportunity of working. In public, Washington would declare that the riot had changed Atlanta for the better by inspiring blacks and whites to come together afterwards in positive ways. The white Atlanteans had discussed appointing black policemen and a public defender to ensure justice in the courts. This didn't happen in the aftermath in the Wilmington, North Carolina riots. Still, the riot severely damaged Booker T. Washington's standing as the official black leader. Whatever good that emerged in Atlanta in aftermath, the riots produced scenes of ugliness and horror that trumps Washington's positive perspective. The riots raised doubts with his stewardship amongst previous uncommitted and some old friends to withdraw from him, and gave enemies fresh ammunition to fire against him. But Washington's biggest transgression, his biggest issue, was his relationship with Theodore Roosevelt. In August of 1906, the Brownsville affair happened the same year of the Atlanta riots. Black soldiers in a segregated unit of the 25th Infantry.
Let me pause really quick before we get to this. It's like I told y'all. Everybody, first of all, jumping ship on him. Then they got his people to turn on him. His homeboys, everybody started turning on him. But I'm not going to lie. Now I'm starting to think about Booker T a separate way. Because all you got to do is stop hanging with that clear man over there and come over here, right? You over there trying to rub shoulders with them clears over there. That's not helping us. As a matter of fact, you told us they devils and not devils, but you told us that we don't even need to be frolicking with them. Why you can't stay from around there? Even if I believed in your cause, When you are so hypocritical to the point where I don't even have to try to prove your hypocrisy, it becomes too much. It makes me disregard the message, even if it's the best message for me. And I think that's what was happening with a lot of people. All it takes is somebody to point out the fact that, yo, yeah, y'all following this nigga, but look, he up their ass. He telling y'all do one thing, but he doing the same thing he telling y'all not to do. And I can see a lot of black people in that time, because logically, I'm thinking to myself, I'll be looking at that nigga sideways too. Like, hold on. You know what? I ain't even think about it like that. What you mean we got to segregate while you over there trying to get a job with the president? Huh? And he kept going up there hanging out with them. But I think the president did that on purpose for what happened, so that it could disband his followers. And I think the people who jumped ship, they were paid in on it too.
Regiment stationed in Fort Brown when a white bartender was killed and a white police officer was wounded by gunfire. The racial tensions was already high, and the townspeople accused members of the African American 25th Regiment of shooting the bartender and the policeman. Although
Okay. Old age Farrakhan, you better shut your mouth and keep on talking. Okay. Because that's what it's giving. He got up there, gave that good 4th of July speech, girl, had me all in my feelings. I watched that 4th of July speech in 2020. Yes, I did. It was a wonderful speech too. He talked about how we the real people of the Bible and all of that. It was a great speech. But every time I turn around, Farrakhan all up in them folks' face, especially down at the Church of Scientology. So I'm looking at Farrakhan like, are you really trying to, like, what, huh? Is this real? What you saying to me? Do you really believe that? Because you ain't living like that. You saying it, but you ain't doing it. That's what it's giving. Old age Farrakhan, for real.
American 25th Regiment of shooting the bartender and the policeman. Although their commanders said that the soldiers had been in their barracks all night and that evidence had been planted against the men, it was never clear who had actually done the shooting, and it's possible that whites falsely blamed the soldiers to get them transferred out of Brownsville. And even if the black soldiers had done the shooting, it would have only been a few of the black soldiers that had been guilty, but all 167 were dismissed and lost their army pension. Washington would plead with Theodore Roosevelt not to act until further investigation, but Theodore Roosevelt replied that he could not possibly refrain from firing the soldiers. Brownsville affair predictably won Theodore Roosevelt the respect of Southern whites. They called their dismissal the most praiseworthy thing the president had done. This miscarriage of justice.
And this is how crazy niggas is. Stay running behind them white folks, even the ones who tell you run away from them. So Booker T telling black folks to stay away from white folks. Yet he frolicking with the same white folks he telling niggas to stay away from. Now he start rubbing shoulders. I'm pretty sure they start doing little cocktail parties. Oh, come by, you know, woo, you know what I'm saying? Type teas or whatever. Make him feel comfortable. Then they set him up to get him exposed, which they did. Exposed him in front of all his people, saying while he's saying this, he doing this. Now fast forward, your people mad at you, so you thinking I can just rely on the people I've been rubbing shoulders with. I'm pretty sure President Roosevelt, he's a good friend of mine. I can go to him, and Roosevelt did him dirty. So you go to advocate for black soldiers who were wrongfully convicted and advocate for them not to be fired or discharged from the military and for a fair trial, and Roosevelt looked you square in the face and told you to kick rocks, nigga. That's what I got from it, because Roosevelt looked at him and said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. What you mean? You are the commander-in-chief. When it comes to the military, yes, you can. Yes, you can. More than people know. Yes, you can. Nigga, you are the boss of the military. That's your job. Commander-in-chief. That's your job. You run the military. What you mean there's nothing you could do? That was something he could do. He didn't want to do it. And he didn't give a damn about them niggas down at Fort Brown, I'm sorry. He didn't give a damn about them niggas in the South. He didn't give a damn about Booker T sitting across from him. But this what happened when you go over there trying to, you see what I'm saying? So Booker T couldn't look at W.E.B. Du Bois a type of way for wanting to integrate because you were physically doing it on your own. That's a problem. That's a huge problem.
And arrogance would taint Roosevelt in the eyes of blacks who already didn't trust him. The stain would instantly spread to Washington, who was his ally and advisor. Washington's refusal to disavow Theodore Roosevelt's decision openly may have been the worst mistake he made of his public career. He may have believed.
So you couldn't even come out to your people? So this is what's going on. So after Roosevelt told him kick rocks with Jesus sandals on, his people, Booker T. Washington's people, black people, were looking at him, well, what did he say? And then Booker T was like, he said, he want me to get the bike, but we can keep it at his house though. And when we want to ride it, we can ride it. But he refused to just flat out say that cracker played me and he played y'all too because he won't help us free our brethren. He refused to even speak ill toward the president because in his silly little mind, he thought that him and the president really was something that they weren't. He was using you. And it worked flawlessly. So no matter how cool you think you are, when it comes to self-preservation from them people, they will always practice self-preservation first. That's what their history is all about.
That some of the soldiers were guilty, and it's possible that Washington hoped that he might effect a reversal of the Brownsville dismissal or at least a modification of Roosevelt's decision. Washington would appeal privately to Secretary of War William Taft to change the order, but Theodore Roosevelt would override him. It's possible that Booker T. Washington did not publicly disavow Theodore Roosevelt's decision because keeping silent on events beyond his control had generally proved to be the correct strategy.
No, it's a correct strategy when you're in the crowd. See, Booker T, you wasn't in the crowd, and that's your problem. See, you trying to play the game. Booker T trying to play the game when he ain't even put in. Well, in the past, it's not good that I publicly shame or publicly say something negative about the president. Yeah, if he's your colleague or constituent, that nigga just played you. Booker T was supposed to come out here and say, F all these crackers, and I think we need to start a civil war. And that's just me going over the board, over the top. But you know what I mean? He was supposed to come back to his people who he claimed was first. He was supposed to come back to his people and say, you know what? I messed up. I made a mistake. I mistakenly, foolishly thought that this cracker, because he's the president, he played a game. He made me think that we were going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm thinking I'm doing this for us. Turns out he just is backstabbing as the rest of them. That's what he should have did. That's what he should have did. And I'm pretty sure, like niggas today, niggas is niggas in 2025 or 1925 or 1825. I'm pretty sure amongst each other and probably in the crowd, somebody probably yelled out, Booker, your whole ass nigga. You feel what I'm saying? And I'm pretty sure when they left the place, they was probably all talking amongst each other at church. Girl, Booker T full of shit. Girl, Booker T ain't gonna do nothing. Booker T done went sat down there and frolicked with them crackers, and they sent them back home packing, and now we jacked up. Now we got soldiers getting kicked out the military. We worse off than we was. So should we really go economically independent? I'm thinking that this is how I would think. Think about it. Maybe W.E.B. Du Bois' approach was better because trying to go separate, this is what they do to us. I mean, at least if I was living in 1909 when Booker T came back, if I could go back to 3 times in history just to say something, it's 3 times I want to go back. Yeah, JH, he should have dragged Roosevelt. First and foremost, Meatball. I would love to go back when Meatball gave a speech about anything. I don't give a damn if he was making a speech about raviolis. I would love to be in the crowd for Meatball. I would love to be able to go back and also see Mike. I would love to be in the crowd when that nigga got the wailing and I have a dream. Nigga, wake up, nigga. Wake your short ass up, nigga. Wake your ass up. Because now you about to F everybody up. I would love to go down there and say that. I just want to call Meatball. I would love to say, Meatball, you fat, funky, nasty hole. I just would love to be in the crowd and say that to him. And then Frederick Douglass, if I were able to go back, I would yell out the crowd, bro, you wrong. Bro, you literally lost any trust you ever had in the community. You're jacked because you just as bad as these niggas you claim that we need to get away from. They say he Black European, Birchwood. Allegedly. I don't know. But they say he Black European because he damn sure don't look acorn. But that's a story for a whole nother day. That's a story for a whole nother day. Because from what I saw and from what I had seen a while ago, they say he a Black European. Allegedly. You see what I'm saying? So it wouldn't be surprising to me.
Usually died down and were forgotten. He also understood that Roosevelt was the most powerful man in the United States with a rash personality and latently racist tendencies. Therefore, Theodore Roosevelt's attitude towards him could change instantly. If he said the wrong thing, public criticism might precipitate a break from Theodore Roosevelt, therefore end any positive influence Washington could have on the White House and the Republican Party.
Real results, zero hassle. Iveen Health's personalized GLP-1 weight
So
loss.
let me get this straight. Booker T held his tongue and didn't want to rock the boat when it came to the president. And I get it, that's the president. But let's just leave a personal level to it because they was cool. They was chilling. They was hanging out. So he refused to say something in reference to the president or anything negative about the president, but then in the same breath admit that the president has racist tendencies and God forbid he on his rag or whatever he got going on, he'll go in on niggas. So you scared to talk about him, but he'll drag you for filth. Got it. That's what I'm talking about. And this is why I don't believe nobody is a leader, and I don't think nobody should be a leader. You are your leader. Everything you need to succeed, everything you need to do well, and everything we need to come together is inside of us equally amongst ourselves. We just don't know how to tap into it. I don't believe in the one leader thing. I've never believed in it from the beginning. I've always thought the whole one person thing was a single point of failure. Bull crap. We don't need one person to lead us. You can lead us. You can lead you. I can lead me. You see what I'm saying? Like, I think that's crazy.
Disasters in Atlanta and the Brownsville injustice marked the beginning of a tragic end to Washington's leadership. His influence had risen steadily in 1895 through 1904 when he personified all the hopes for progress among African Americans. As his greatest success as a racial leader derived from his ability to shape Theodore Roosevelt's policies from 1901 to 1904. But what Theodore Roosevelt had given Washington, he took away with the Brownsville affair. Washington never did admit the extent of the damage to his leadership, but by 1907, Washington appeared to be on his way out, with the demise resulting from his mistaken loyalty to Theodore Roosevelt. His largest achievements laid in the building of black men and his inspiration of hope, but his career as a leader of the race will be judged by his political wins and losses. And after 1906, there were not many victories. Washington kept doing things the same way, but he was much less successful and appeared vulnerable, and this fed to the enthusiasm and efforts in those who intended to displace him once and for all. By 1913, at the beginning of the Woodrow Wilson administration, Washington had largely fell out of favor. He remained at Tuskegee Institute until a congenital heart failure ended his life in November 14th, 1915. He was only 59. Shortly before he died, Washington had begun to abandon his accommodationist tactics in favor of advancing civil rights of black Americans and denouncing unequal educational facilities, disenfranchisement, lynchings, and segregation. It's possible that his legacy could have been much different had he lived, but unfortunately, we will never know. Booker T. Washington had a very complex and polarizing legacy. His views and beliefs were somewhat mixed. He lived through a sea of change for African Americans. He was openly supportive of African Americans taking a back seat to the white community, but he simultaneously secretly funded several court cases that challenged segregation. His emphasis on economic self-determination above political and civil rights fell out of favor as his views of his largest critic, W.E.B. Du Bois, took hold and inspired the civil rights movement. Any discussion about Washington immediately conjures a contrast with W.E.B. Du Bois. The legacy of the two is so intertwined that one cannot be discussed without comparing them to the other. Washington was supported and admired by blacks, but he was equally hated by whites and blacks. A lifelong commitment to African Americans was too often forgotten by the very people he was attempting to help. Washington's school curriculum of progressive ideas, practices was one of the most celebrated models of education, although it was largely criticized for dumbing down the expectations of blacks and preparing them for a life of servitude. Yet today, the need for a skilled work has given rise to efforts to encourage and support career and technical education programs. He also used his position to influence charitable contributions from Northern philanthropists such as Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Julius Renwald to many of the nation's other black institutions and causes. Lastly, Washington built one of the great institutions of higher learning in America, Tuskegee University. It continues to stand almost 130 plus years later with thousands of black graduates who are committed to uplifting black people and the quality of life in America. Thank you. This has been One Mic. I'm your host, Country Boy.
Shout out to One Mic on YouTube. It sounds to me like Booker T was lined up. Booker T came out the gate running, talking about socioeconomic and economic independence. And them Clears saw that and said, we need our best niggas on the case. This is me surmising how I feel about what I learned, okay? Them Clears said, we need our best nigga on the case. They went grab W.E.B. Du Bois. They went got W.E.B. Say, W.E.B, go get that nigga. Sick W.E.B on the nigga. So then W.E.B come out there, put a diss track on him, but he ain't put the diss track on him till later, but he came out talking about Booker T a whole out here. You see what I'm saying? Booker T played it cute. He was just telling people to be independent, but they backdoored him again because they realized that wasn't too particularly working. So they sent the Clear on there, but not just any Clear. One of the top Clears, the top Clear, the president, somebody he's not going to want to deny. And now he want to think that now we get the president to make him think that they cool, make sure he think that they cool. And that will ultimately have him lose credibility with his people. And that's what we need because we don't want them people to be economically independent. We don't want them to have their own schools. We don't want them to have their own nothing. We are trying to take this stuff away from them, not help them continue to build it. I think he was backdoored on both sides. On the nigga side, and that's why all the niggas started jumping ship. And I think he was backdoored on the white boy side. But the white boy side, he deserved because he had no reason to go up there playing with Freddie Roosevelt. If Franklin, is it Franklin or Freddie? It don't matter. One of the Roosevelts. If that person wasn't talking about how to help the black community and showing me ways in which he could do it and then doing it, there's nothing we need to talk about. There's nothing. Don't tell me to go join their political system and then you go become chummy and best friends with the president. Booker T was out of pocket for that. He just was. You can't sleep white and be pro-black. That's what he was doing. Sleeping white, trying to be pro-black in the doggone public. You can't do that. You just can't. So I think the critiques were fair on whatever his critiques were. But basically what it sounded like to me, and I'm going conspiracy theory, deep, dark conspiracy theory this time. Sounds like to me what happened was after they backdoored him and lined him up, sounds like to me they got him up out of here. That's why he passed so young at 59. They stripped him of his wealth. Don't it sound like familiar? Don't it sound familiar? They stripped him of his wealth, stripped him of everything that he owned and everything that he had, and hasta la vista him up out of here. See ya, wouldn't want to be ya. So that's why he, in my opinion, in my conspiracy theory opinion, that's probably why he got up out of here at 59. That's young, especially back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Them niggas back then was living 200 years. I mean, not technically, but you know what I mean? Like 100 years old was the average, damn near. You see what I'm saying? So I don't know, fair critiques, but I think that his message, all in all, I think W.E.B. I think that Booker T. Washington's message, all in all, was still the best message. I think it's still the best message today. I think that we need to be independent of these people. The biggest mistake is trying to be in them folks' space. We cannot do that. We just can't. William, hey, beautiful. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you. TD, making it rain. Hold on, let me cue the music so we can make it rain with you, TD. Thank you so much, TD, for the super chat. I appreciate you. Thank you for making it rain. I make it rain. I make it rain. I make it rain on them hoes. I make it rain. I make it rain on them hoes. She says, hi, Boo and family. Happy Educational Friday. Thank you so much, TD. I love you. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for your generous contributions all the time. And thank you everybody who has ever contributed. And contributing means clicking on the video and liking the video. That's what contributing is to me. Alice Jane, thank you for the super chat, says, for my favorite educator. Aw, thank you. Thank you so much, Alice Jane. I appreciate you. And William, thank you so much for becoming a new member. Lady Season, thank you for the super chat. We are going to make it stay safe. Okay, yeah. Gotcha. Thank you so much. And Deserving One, thank you for the super sticker. You guys, I got to get off. We had 2 hours. I didn't plan on being 2 hours. I said an hour, but you know me, I'd run my mouth. But with that being said, y'all, I got to get off of here. I will catch y'all on the next one. Love y'all down to the ground. Happy Educational Friday. I hope y'all have an amazing weekend, and I hope you get everything you deserve and want and love. Appreciate y'all. Catch y'all on the next one. Peace.
Can you hear me now? Oh, let's go. It's your boy Big Chew, the voice of the beat. You know what I want? Blaze up. Come on, Blaze up.
It's the beat for me.
Wow, 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 for your guy, for your B-O-Y. Drop it for your guy, for your B-O-Y. Do it for your guy, for your B-O-Y. Come on, baby, we love. For your boy. For your boy. Hustle for your boy. Mix it for your boy. Drop it for your, lift it up.
Mr. Carroll, how you give the voodoo doll time to talk? I don't get no fucking time to talk.
Who the voodoo doll is?
The nigga you just had up here.